welcome to this live reading from A Gentleman's Stipulation by Jane Wilde, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Dorset, England, December 1819. Lady Victoria Gilbert suppressed a shudder as she stepped into the hallway of Bindon Abbey. She'd always been intimidated by the manor's foreboding Gothic architecture and its shadowy corners, which candlelight could never seem to reach. She'd spent most of her childhood between these walls, playing with the Viscount of Bindon's older children, Matthew and Isabel Howard. The Gilberts and Howards were old, titled families, and their substantial grounds bordered one another. It was only natural their family lines would unite as well. Victoria had grown up with the knowledge that one day her best friend would marry her brother George and become, in truth, her sister. But fate had other plans in store for them. It had been 9 years since Victoria had last set foot in the Abbey, and her once unwavering friendship with her childhood playmates was now a distant memory. Instead of the bittersweet nostalgia one often felt upon returning to a familiar haunt, a sense of sadness and regret weighed her down. Victoria was abruptly jolted to the present when her mother, the Dowager Countess of Digby, pinched her arm to get her attention. Following her mother's gaze, she realized with some dismay that the butler stood stoically with his hands outstretched, waiting patiently for her coat and gloves. Feeling abashed, Victoria hastily stripped them off and handed them over just as their host, Matthew Howard, the new Viscount of Bindon, came over to greet them. Matthew was a tall, slim man with auburn hair, blue eyes, and his late father's unfortunate hooked nose. He was handsome enough, she supposed. Ironically, while Victoria was the same age as the Viscount, she was considered to be on the opposite end of the marriage mart, closer to spinsterhood and being placed firmly on the shelf, in fact. It was true, Victoria was eager to be wed, but she couldn't bring herself to see Matthew as anything more than the awkward boy of her youth. Even the lure of being a viscountess couldn't tempt her to his bed. Not that he'd offered, although it was growing increasingly difficult to ignore their mother's not-so-subtle hints. With a welcoming smile, Matthew bent over her mamma's hand. "Lady Digby, you look ravishing tonight, and you, Vic," he added, turning to give her an affectionate kiss on her cheek, "are as lovely as ever. If I'd known that the best way to lure you back to Bindon Abbey was to have my sister marry your cousin, I would have conspired to bring them together ages ago." Her mother chuckled good-naturedly, while Victoria wagged a playful finger at him. "False flattery will get you nowhere, my lord. Admit it, you only invited us to this lavish affair to show us off to your London guests. You want to impress the Hall family with your titled connections and grand neighbors." He beamed at her. "I should feel wounded by your accusation, but I won't try to deny it. I should point out, though, your beauty and charm alone would make you a feather in any host's cap. Thank you both for coming. I promise this dinner isn't meant to bolster my image, but to help distract Digby and Isabel from the endless wedding preparations." Matthew offered an arm to both ladies as he led them toward the drawing room where the rest of the party congregated. Just before they reached the door, Victoria asked in a hushed tone, "How are things going with the Hall family? Have you managed to mend those burned bridges?" He shot her an appreciative look. "Actually, it's going far better than I'd expected. Mr. Hall is a rigid man, but not inclined to forgive easily, but his son is a bang-up fellow and is doing his best to smooth things over." Most of the Howard family's acquaintances couldn't fathom why the young Viscount had invited virtual strangers to his sister's wedding. Not Victoria, however. She knew that the senior Mr. Hall had been in business with the late Lord Bindon before their business arrangement had turned sour. Mr. Hall, being the wildly rich and successful mill owner he was, could do without the Bindon supply of grain, but not the other way around. The Bindon estate had suffered severe financial losses as a result, and Matthew was determined to right his father's catastrophic mistake and win over Mr. Hall's trust in business. So he'd invited the entire Hall family to Bindon Abbey to spend Christmas with them in Dorset and attend Isabel's nuptials. As the three of them entered the drawing room, Victoria took in the guests already assembled there. She easily spotted the rest of the Howard family: Oscar, the tousle-haired youngest member of the brood, Isabel, and their mother Caroline, the Dowager Viscountess of Bindon. Victoria didn't mind crowds, but she preferred intimate gatherings and was pleased to note that beside her cousin, there were only 2 other guests present. Since she didn't recognize the young couple, she assumed they were members of the Hall family. Lady Bindon rose from her seat and rushed over to greet them. It wasn't difficult to see where Isabel had gotten her fine looks. The Dowager Viscountess had retained much of her youthful beauty, including her thick blonde hair and violet blue eyes. After exchanging pleasantries with their hostess, Victoria greeted her cousin and then paused to chat with Oscar, who was eager to share his latest escapade, which had him sent down from school early. After much good-natured scolding, Victoria moved on to talk to Isabel. But her friend gave her no time to converse and instead linked her arm through hers and practically dragged her toward the unfamiliar pair. Isabel gave her a conspiratorial smile as they approached them and whispered, "Mr. Hall has been feeling under the weather today, so he's taking dinner in his room with his wife. However, Mr. John Blake Hall, Jr. and his sister Patience have agreed to join us. Come, let me introduce you." Surprised and somewhat amused by her friend's eagerness, Victoria gave the couple a friendly smile as Isabel made the introductions. She curtsied and muttered a polite, "How do you do?" as she took in the younger members of the Hall family. The first thing she noticed about the siblings was that they were both of marriageable age. Miss Hall looked to be around 18 years old and wore a fashionable pink evening gown with silver trimmings. While the dress was beautiful, the wearer, unfortunately, was not. Her features were much too masculine to be considered pretty. She had a square jaw and a large nose and a figure that was more plump than comely. The girl also seemed painfully shy as she blushed and stared at Victoria with wide eyes before mumbling a quiet greeting. Victoria steeled herself not to feel sorry for the unattractive girl. With the impressive dowry her wealthy papa would settle on her, Miss Hall would most certainly have her pick of suitors. Mr. Hall, on the other hand, seemed to be cut from a different cloth. Where his sister was timid and unassuming, he was confident and charming. Bending over Victoria's hand, he shot her a devilish grin, with his posture easy and relaxed. He was not what one would call classically handsome. Everything about him was too large. His nose and mouth were too wide, and his mutton-sized hands looked like they belonged to a common laborer rather than the rich son of a mill owner. Victoria was tall for a woman, but even she had to look up to meet his forest green eyes. His dark blonde hair was fashionably cut, and his London wardrobe bespoke wealth and good taste. It was his manner that she found pleasing, though. There was something unmistakably attractive about a man confident in his own skin. She returned his easy grin and was looking forward to spending the evening flirting with him when she caught Isabel glancing between them with a smug expression on her face. Her friend was scheming again, and the realization made Victoria's back stiffen. She hated being a pawn in other people's games. "Matthew will be coming over shortly to lead you into dinner, Patience," Isabel announced to their small group, "while you, Blake, have the honor of escorting Victoria." Miss Hall seemed uncomfortable with Isabel's eccentric use of people's given names, but Victoria was used to it. What she didn't appreciate was how blatantly she and Mr. Hall were being thrown together. They'd just been introduced, after all. Forcing her negative thoughts aside, Victoria caught Mr. Hall studying her with open interest. His attention made her blush. His smile widened before he said, "It would be my privilege to be your escort, Miss Gilbert. It's not often I have the pleasure of being seated next to such a beautiful woman, and an earl's cousin, no less." "It's Lady, actually," Victoria replied with a brittle smile. "I'm the daughter of the late Earl of Digby, so the proper form of address is Lady Victoria. If I had a younger sister, she would go by Miss Gilbert." She didn't know why she said that. It made her sound like a snob, and she regretted her response immediately, especially when she saw the look of embarrassment cross his face. He cleared his throat and muttered a hasty, "Of course, forgive my mistake, Lady Victoria." Clearly, her evening wasn't about to get any better. Victoria and Mr. Hall didn't speak as he led her into the dining room. Then, once seated at the grand table, the conversation between them was stilted and strained. They had nothing in common, neither in acquaintances nor in background. After exhausting the topic of the weather in Dorset, and with their dinner companions engaged in conversations elsewhere, they lapsed into an uncomfortable silence. "So," Mr. Hall began yet another attempt of polite conversation. "You're the same age as Miss Howard, I take it. Were you friends growing up?" Did he really just make a remark about my age? Victoria bit back a caustic retort and said, "Yes, we were neighbors and childhood friends. Our mothers planned to launch us into society together when we came of age." "Planned? You didn't make your come out together then?" She shook her head. "Isabel left home when she was 14, and I had my first season later than planned." "I thought that a lady's debut in society is crucial to secure a match. Isn't that what you prepare for once you leave the schoolroom?" "Why the delay?" he asked curiously. "Because my father almost bankrupted the estate with his fondness for gambling, and when my brother came into the title, he squandered the rest of the fortune and proceeded to get himself killed in an opium den." Of course, Victoria didn't say any of that. Instead, she recited the line that she'd used frequently over the past few years. "My father disliked London and wasn't in a hurry to send me or Mama to the capital. In any case, when he passed away and my brother inherited the earldom, I had a season." "And how old were you then?" Grinding her teeth in silent frustration, she bit out, 20. His brows rose in obvious surprise. "Just the one season? Surely you could have had many being an earl's, daughter. Did you dislike London?" Irritated by his personal questions, she replied in a clipped tone, "London was not what I expected. I quickly learned that members of the upper class are eager to spread malicious rumors and gossip with little or no facts to back them up. After a couple of months, I cut my season short and returned home." He frowned at her. "Gossip is for the feeble-minded. You should never pay it any heed, and you certainly shouldn't allow it to run you off. You need a sturdier backbone if you wish to mingle with the members of high society." His tone was flat, which reminded Victoria of a tutor who'd recited the same lecture dozens of times before. She looked down her nose at him. "I am Lady Victoria Gilbert, daughter of the late Earl of Digby. My pedigree alone guarantees my position in high society, Mr. Hall." Her dinner companion looked momentarily taken aback. Then he snorted. "You're certainly an entitled snob, I'll give you that." "If you mean to offend, sir, then I'm afraid your barb has missed its mark. I'd rather be an entitled snob than a pompous ass." His eyes flashed in anger, and he opened his mouth to deliver what would have undoubtedly been a scathing retort. Unfortunately for him, however, their hostess chose that moment to stand up and announce that the ladies were retiring to the drawing-room, leaving the men to their cigars and port. Relieved to have been spared his wrath, at least momentarily, Victoria quickly rose to her feet. When she looked down at him and their eyes met, she couldn't help giving him a mocking smile before following the ladies out of the room. Outside, in the hallway, she paused, noting how her hands shook from that heated confrontation. She'd never been so insulted in her life. Her stomach roiled in anger, and she wanted nothing more than to go back into the dining room and slap Mr. Hall for making her feel that way. At the same time, she didn't wish to subjugate herself to the tongue-lashing he was undoubtedly rehearsing for her. Deciding to take the coward's way out, she pleaded a headache and made her excuses to Lady Bindon. Her mother, instantly concerned, offered to go home with her, but Victoria insisted that she stay. Mama didn't get many opportunities to dine away from home, and Victoria couldn't afford to waste time waiting for her. The gentlemen were sure to rejoin the ladies at any moment. So, after a hasty farewell, she dashed to the front door. As the Digby carriage carried her back to Minturn Manor moments later, Victoria fervently hoped she'd never have to suffer through another tete-a-tete with Mr. Hall again.